All right, so earnings season's here, and we're diving deep into CSX's Q3 2024 earnings call today. These calls, they can be a bit dense, so we're going to break it all down, make it clear, see what's really going on.
Yeah, exactly. It's about going beyond those headlines. What did these numbers actually tell us about how CSX is doing? What's their strategy? That's what we want to unpack.
Right, like on the surface, CSX had an okay quarter,
Yeah.
right? Revenue and operating income, both up. But you got to remember that they were dealing with some serious stuff.
Hmm.
Hurricanes, that port strike, economic uncertainty.
And that's what makes this so interesting, right? How are they managing growth with all those challenges? That's a key question here.
Totally. Okay, so let's dig in. CEO Joe Hinrich starts off by thanking the CSX team, especially with those hurricanes. Helene, in particular, seems to have really hit them hard,
It did. And what I noticed there was the emphasis on supporting their employees. Like they're really trying to highlight that commitment to their workforce.
which is really interesting, especially
Yeah.
with all the talk about working conditions in the rail industry, right? Is this a genuine cultural shift at CSX, or are they just responding to pressure? What do you think?
I think it's probably a bit of both, right? But publicly acknowledging these efforts, it's smart, especially as they're trying to balance efficiency with keeping employees and customers happy. We'll see how it all actually plays out.
For sure. And speaking of actions, did you catch that thing about CSX having its lowest number of train accidents ever in September?
Hmm.
Pretty big deal, considering the whole safety debate around the rail industry.
Absolutely. Shows they're taking those safety initiatives seriously. In an industry that's always under scrutiny, tangible results like that are huge.
Now, this next part, this is where it gets interesting for me. They managed to grow their merchandise volume significantly. New business, truck conversions, all that.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. The trucking market is having a tough time right now.
Right. So, how are they pulling that off? Is it pricing, service, a combination? And more importantly, what happens if trucking bounces back?
Good questions. And it seems like they're thinking the same thing. They just made that new 5-year agreement with their unions, even with inflation kind of cooling down.
Yeah, interesting, right? It's like they're choosing long-term stability, betting on a secure workforce for efficiency down the road. Shows how important those skilled rail workers are to them.
Almost like they're playing a different game than everyone else, making these moves that seem odd at first, but could give them a real edge later on.
Right. That proactive approach, especially now, it says something. They're thinking long-term, that's for sure.
And then there's Hurricane Helene, second worst in CSX's history, they said. To recover that quickly with minimal financial impact, that's impressive.
Definitely. Speaks to good planning, strong leadership, and a resilient network. Bouncing back from something that big is no easy feat.
No kidding. And it sounds like their CEO thinks that improved company culture, the employee engagement we were talking about, played a big role in that.
That's an interesting connection. Does a positive culture where employees feel valued actually make the entire operation more efficient, more resilient? Now, that's something worth exploring further. Could have big implications for any business, really.
Makes you think, doesn't it? Happy employees, healthy bottom line. Is there a link?
Really does. And it wasn't just the operational stuff, right? Those hurricanes, they hit their revenue too. Fuel surcharges down, coal prices down. That all adds up.
Yeah, it's like they're juggling internal and external challenges at the same time.
Exactly. Lower diesel prices, a softer coal market globally. The CEO mentioned those. It shows how everything's connected. It's not just what CSX does, it's the whole global picture impacting them.
And on top of that, they're dealing with those hurricane recovery costs. I think they said Helene alone was a $50 million hit.
Yeah, significant. And that's not even counting the long term rebuilding stuff. But what I find interesting is even with all that, they're sticking to their guns, still focused on that long term growth we talked about.
It's like they're saying, look, we're not just surviving, we're going to come out of this stronger. Didn't they mention an investor day coming up?
They did. I'm curious to hear more about those service initiatives they talked about. Kevin Boone, their chief commercial officer, he was highlighting those. Sounds like that's been key to their merchandise growth, even with all the competition. How are they setting themselves apart? That's the million-dollar question.
Right. And how do they keep that edge as things change, especially with that potential ILA strike in January? That's a whole other can of worms.
Absolutely. Remember how they said even that short port strike had ripple effects? Imagine something bigger.
It really shows how interconnected everything is. Supply chains are fragile, whether it's a strike, a hurricane, whatever.
Businesses got to be ready for anything these days, especially global ones. Agility, resilience, that's key now.
Speaking of resilience, they're still committed to those shareholder returns. Even with those hurricane costs, they're not backing down on buybacks and dividends.
That's a statement. Shows confidence in the long game. Actions speak louder than words, right?
It's like a balancing act. Investing in growth, managing challenges, keeping shareholders happy.
Not easy, but it shows a clear vision. They have a plan, and that leads us to another big part of their strategy: customers.
Right. Customer service,
Ye-
building those relationships, they kept coming back to that.
It's like they see that as their advantage, you know? A lot of industries, they just focus on efficiency, not the customer experience. CSX is trying to change that.
Trying to redefine what it means to be a leader, not just moving freight, but building those partnerships.
Smart move. Because ultimately, happy customers, that's what drives everything: revenue, loyalty, sustainable growth.
So we've covered a lot. Hurricanes, labor, economics, strikes, even their philosophy on customers. Where does CSX go from here?
$1 million question, right? It's a complex landscape, always changing. But they seem to have a good head on their shoulders. It's almost as if
They're thinking long term, looking at the whole picture, not just reacting, but actually planning ahead, investing in their people, their infrastructure, those customer relations, like you said.
right. And next year, that'll be telling. That potential ILA strike in January, remember? We've seen how much disruption those can cause.
Absolutely. That's huge. And it's not just CSX,
Yeah.
right? The whole supply chain feels that. Makes you wonder how they're preparing for that.
That's the thing, isn't it? You got to be proactive these days. Can't just wait for things to happen.
It's not just about external stuff either, right?
Yeah.
Strikes, hurricanes, the economy changes, customers change, even technology. They got to adapt to all of it.
Exactly. The companies that can handle all that, the short-term stuff and the long-term vision, those are the winners.
So we've covered a lot of ground on CSX this quarter. What's the key takeaway for you? What should our listeners be watching for?
I think it's about strategy, thinking ahead. CSX is making big moves, investing in their workforce, putting customers first, keeping shareholders happy, even when things are uncertain. The big question is, will it pay off? That's what we'll see.
Great point, and something we'll definitely keep an eye on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into CSX's earnings call. Until next time, stay curious.